Good morning. I see a lot of people that have the same badge as me. And I might be the first person who tells you this. If you see someone that has this badge, they try to inject a custom SVG into their badge. So I'm on your side. OK. So I'm going to start talking about Alexa skill development. And the way I do it is I just start on Alexa skill and let it talk for 40 minutes. Alexa, start the talk.
Hello, Laracon EU. I hope you are ready for this talk. Marcel is going to show you how you can create your very own Alexa skill. Are you ready, Marcel?
Yes.
Woohoo, let's do this.
Yeah, she's not that enthusiastic. OK, she's muted because otherwise she will freak out all the time. So quickly about me. My name is Marcel Pociot. I come from far away from Germany. And I started a company around 9 months ago, which is called Beyond Code. And we are currently 2 people. We do a lot of Laravel-related development, chatbots, voice applications, all that sort of stuff. And if you want, follow me on Twitter, where I rant about Laravel stuff all the time. So when I'm not working, which has become quite a lot since I started my own thing, I love to do open source. But now the good thing is that since I own my own company, I can just do it and say it's work. So I do quite a lot of things. I have around 62 packages online that have been downloaded a lot of times now, which is mind-blowing. So chances are that you've used some of our stuff maybe in production or played with things like Botman. So if you want like a Botman sticker, just come to me, say hi. And beside all the PHP and Laravel-related things, I also maintain and wrote a Chrome extension, which is called the Laravel Test Tools extension. And it allows you pretty much to record Dusk tests while browsing on your website. And it's being used by a lot of people, which, even though this is not the TDD way of doing things, so Adam Webben would kill me for it, but it helps creating a lot of tests every week, which is just great. And yeah, as I said, I also do this thing called Botman. I'm not going into too much detail because we'll cover it a bit later. So, voice assistants. There are basically 2 brands that we have there. We have Amazon with the whole Alexa Echo system with Echo Show that also has displays. And then we have Google Home. So just a quick hands up, who of you has an Alexa at home or in the office? OK, who has a Google Home? OK, also quite a lot of people. So the things I'm talking about, while they are specific to Alexa development, you can apply that to Google skills as well. The terminology changes a bit. So Alexa or Amazon, they name things differently. But you can apply that to Google as well. So I thought about it would be cool to build our own skill. So what I came up with is a conference skill. And I thought about 4 features that this skill will have. So at first, I want to be able to list upcoming conferences. The second feature should be I want to be able to list conferences for a specific programming language. And then I want to list conferences for a specific city. And last but not least, I wanted to add some personalization. So when I start the skill, it should ask me for my name, remember the name, and then just use it later on. So before we dive into any code, we actually have to take a look at how does this thing even work, and how does the invocation for Alexa work. So when you start creating your own Alexa skill, you basically can choose between these 2 skill types. So there are smart home skills, which those of you who have an Alexa at home probably know, where you can say something like, Alexa, turn up the volume by 50% in the bathroom. Or Alexa, turn on the lights in the living room. So this is a skill that is explicitly bound to a physical device that you own somewhere. And the other skill type is a so-called custom interaction model. And this is what we're going to use for the conference skill. It basically allows you to build whatever you want without without too many restraints. So the way things work with these smart devices is you have some invocation pattern. You have something like, Alexa, open conference guide. And if we take this apart, we have Alexa, which is the trigger keyword for the device to start listening to what you're going to say. You can change this to Echo or Amazon or computer, whoever calls this thing computer. And then there's open, which is just a filling word to let the device know what you want to do and to make it feel more natural. And then there's conference guide, which is the invocation name. So you can think about it as the name of the application that you want to start. And besides just opening a specific skill, you can also combine it with a specific intention. So you can say something like, Alexa, ask conference guide about upcoming conferences. And again, if we take this apart, we have the trigger keyword for the device. Then we have ask, which is just a fill word to make it feel more natural. Conference guide, again, is the invocation name, so the device knows this is the skill that we want to use. Another filling word, about, just to make it feel like natural language. And then there's this thing that Alexa calls sample utterances. So upcoming conferences is a sample utterance, which is a part of a sentence that users will say to trigger a specific intent. So upcoming conference, a user would say to look for upcoming conferences. Now, if we think about the second feature that we want to build, being able to list conferences for a specific programming language, then having this as sample utterances would be possible. So your skill could have something like about PHP conferences, JavaScript conferences, Ruby conferences, etc. But if you want to change how a user could interact with your skill, you end up with a lot of these sample sentences that basically mean the same thing. They just have a different variable in place. And for this, there's something that Alexa or Amazon calls slots. So PHP, in this case, is a slot which, well, you can think of it as a variable for some kind of parameter that your skill action can accept. So then we can fill it with different values and reuse it. So basically, you can split up the invocation in these sample utterances that you have to define an intent, and you have slots that can be put into these sample utterances. Now, when you have a lot of skills on your device, you probably end up not knowing what's the name of these skills. So you always have to know, okay, this one was called conference guide, so I have to say, ask conference guide to do blah, blah, blah. And there's this thing called name-free interaction, which is currently in beta from Amazon. But what it will allow you to do is say something like, Alexa, play relaxing sounds with crickets. And as you can see, there's no invocation name in this pattern. So what Alexa or Amazon will do in this case is it will send a JSON response or a JSON payload to a number of matching skills based on maybe some categories they filter out. And basically, they will ask the skill, or you as the developer of the skill, hey, someone wants to play a sound. Can you fulfill this intent? And you also receive the slots so that you can say, okay, there's a sound that the user wants to play, and it's a sound of crickets. And then you respond with basically just Booleans indicating, yes, I can fulfill this intent in the first place. And for each slot, you can also say, I understand this intent, and I can fulfill this intent as well. And based on this, Alexa or Amazon will then basically pick the best fitting skill for your use case. So this will come, I think it's in beta for a couple months already, so maybe it will come soon. Now, I want to talk about some best practices when designing for Alexa, because language is hard, and I'm German, so that means something. This should be pretty clear, because you're dealing with a device that's being triggered by voice, but you always have to think about the spoken sentence. And especially for people like us who probably mostly deal with working for a screen, and for users sitting in front of a screen, this might be something different. So think about this sentence. That the human brain can use language is amazing. We can read that, we understand what it means. But a user would probably say something more like, it's amazing that the human brain can use language. So while both of these sentences mean the same thing, they are expressed in a different way. And you have to think about this when you design these sample utterances for your skill. Next, it should also be clear, keep it simple, because the rule of thumb is use short sentences, one breath of air, not like Mohammed Said, if you know him. He's really into diving, so he has a lot of breath. But keep it short, because you don't want to say like a 5-sentence thing just to trigger some action. Then you can just pull out your phone and Google it. If your skill allows a user to pick from options, so let's say you build a trivia game, then limit it to 3 options at once. Because at the time you reach option 4, your user has forgotten about option 1. It's a bit sad, but yeah, that's the way it works. And only ask for one information at a time. So let's say you build a skill that asks for the name and the age of a user, then do that in 2 separate steps. Not only is this going to save you as a developer a lot of trouble, because you would need to pick apart what's the name, what's the age, but it also just creates a very more fluent user experience. Users have a short attention span. This is pretty much like keeping it simple, but what I mean is, unlike you can do with chatbots, you don't have the time to set up the mood and let people know how they should interact with your device or with your application. So yeah, just keep that in mind, that you need to come to the point very quickly. This one, I hope you agree with me that you should do this all the time, not only for voice bots. You should think always about the domain you're working with. But this is an example from a medical skill. So it was a skill where users can say something like, hey, Alexa, I have a headache. What should I do? And it would respond, take some aspirin. And the problem they ran into was that people were saying, I'm coughing, and they always ran into a situation where the skill would understand I'm coughing, which is the difference. And the reason, or the way they solved it, is they added coffin as a synonym for coughing. Basically just because they haven't to deal with coffin cases, I guess. So when you design these sample utterances, you always have to do this with someone who knows the domain so that you don't run into these situations. And what I like to do when designing these skills is just write down a simple flow chart so that you can see where your users will end up when they say which thing. So this is really simple flowchart for one of the conference skills, and in reality it will look a lot more complex. But this really helps you figure out where your users need to go, what actions they need to perform. Okay, so that's about for the invocation part. So now we understand how we can say things to the device and what we should take care of. Now let's take a look at the request lifecycle, what happens when I say something to the device in the first place. So the user says something like, Alexa, ask conference guide about upcoming conferences. Because of the trigger keyword, your device starts listening, records the audio stream, and sends it to a server from Amazon. On there, the spoken words will be resolved to text, and they will run some natural language processing on it. And with this natural language processing, they try to figure out, with these sample utterances, what was the intention of what the user said. So once they have a matching intent, they will send a JSON payload to an HTTPS endpoint that you can define. There you receive, okay, this is the intent, and these are the slots and the slot values. And based on that, you can perform your business logic, like searching for conferences, and send a response back. So you also send a JSON response, and then this response will get parsed back again to speech, and it will be streamed back to your device, where you then hear it. Now, you see this arrow pointing to the mobile phone. And that's because, well, either you have an Alexa that has a display, then you can show some visual information, or if you don't have that, you can also send what Alexa calls cards to a companion app on your smartphone. So now the real skill building part begins. And this takes place on Amazon's side. Now, some of you who've looked into Alexa skills might wonder, why are we using PHP in the first place? Because there's Lambda, and Amazon is promoting Lambda. Yes, they do. For me personally, and you might disagree with me, but I think it has two main advantages. For me, HTTP servers, they're simple. I can just spin up new servers. I work with them every day. I know this stuff. And I can integrate them into my existing server architecture. And the second benefit is, let's say I already have a website that takes care of searching for conferences, and it's written in PHP. And then I can just create my skill within this application and reuse parts of it for my skill without having to create new API endpoints, expose them to some Lambda functions, things like that. So for me, this makes it a lot easier to use PHP. So if you want to develop a skill, you have to go to the Amazon developer website, create a free account with your Amazon account. If you don't have one, create one. And when you start creating your skill, you first need to come up with the invocation name that you want to use. There are some limitations. For example, you can't use Alexa inside of the invocation name, or Echo, so you can't say Alexa, ask Alexa to ask Alexa. But other than that, you're basically free to use a lot of things. This will go into review, so if you put some swear words in there, I'm not sure it works. And then you start building these intents with these sample utterances. So one intent would be search conferences. And in order for users to search for conferences, we chose 3 examples that the user can say. So they can say something like, which conferences are up next, show me upcoming conferences, and just upcoming conferences. And with these sample utterances, it's not about switching words, but it's really just different ways of how the user could say something that triggers this intention. And then we create an intent for the search conference with language feature that we want to build. And for this, what I like to do is I just write down the sample utterances, such as the user would say it. So something like, is there an upcoming Ruby conference? And then you can just double-click on the parts of the sample utterance that you want to turn into a slot. So on Ruby, and then you can create a new slot for this. So then you just replace this with a slot that I just called programming language. And you end up with something like this. So which programming language conference is upcoming? And now you see at the bottom that we have this intent slot, which is called programming language, but it does not yet have a type. So a type defines which values can go into this specific slot. So you can create a new slot type. I just called mine programming languages. And then you need to define all the possible values for this specific type. So Java, Go, Ruby, JavaScript, and PHP. And for each of these values, you can define these synonyms that I mentioned with coughing and coffin. So for example, if I say JS, then the skill would still resolve this to JavaScript as the value. Now, if you think about the feature where we want to list conferences for a specific city, this is not very practical because you would need to list all cities for a custom slot. So for this, Amazon has a lot of predefined slots that you can use throughout your application. It's a broad variety, so they have things like colors, actors, comic books, countries and cities. I think not all of them are available in every language, so depending on which language you want to build your skill for, or which languages, you would just need to look up if the specific slot type is supported for you. But in the case of the search conference in city feature, we just do the same thing. And as you can see on the bottom, we have this city intent slot, which is of a predefined type, which is Amazon Europe city. So now, I mean, we're limited to European cities in this case, but that's fine. And then once you've defined all of these intents and sample utterances and slots, you need to tell Amazon, OK, now where should we post whatever we find? And you define an HTTPS endpoint. So when I'm developing this locally, I'm using ngrok, which basically just creates a tunnel from my local machine that I can then use while developing. That makes life a lot easier than deploying it all the time. So now we can dive into the fun part, coding it. As I mentioned, we're using this thing called Botman. It's a framework-agnostic PHP library that allows you to create chatbots and voice assistants. And you can use the same code base and basically just plug in different drivers. So you can have a chatbot that is available on Facebook Messenger, Telegram, Nexmo, SMS, and then also on Alexa. So you can just require this Alexa driver to use it. And this would be the basic setup if you don't want to use the framework. Just load the driver and create a new Botman instance. But Botman loves Laravel. So there's also a thing called Botman Studio. It's pretty much just a Laravel 5.6 or tomorrow evening 5.7 installation that includes some nicer ways of how to integrate Botman into your Laravel application. So it allows you to install drivers more easily, like with this artisan command and things like that. And then what you do is, with Botman, you basically just define which messages, or in terms of Alexa, which intents you want to listen for. So we hear for my intent, and once we hear it, we jump into the callback function. and execute it. And then we can just use the reply method to reply some text, and Alexa will then say it for us. And like this, you just define the logic for all the different intents. Now, if you struggle because we're using a lot of callbacks and closures, you don't need to do this. You can also point this to a class and a method, so it's all fine. And then you just call the listen method, and this lives in your webhook endpoint. And then it's up to write the skill logic. So we listen for the search conference intent, and once we hear it, we jump into the closure. For this, I just have a static array of conferences, and I create a response string, which will be the response that Alexa says to me. The upcoming conferences are, and then just imploded the array of conferences, and then we reply it. Now, there's this should end session here. And the reason for that is, if you say something to Alexa, the default response is that the microphone remains open, and that your skill is basically awaiting some additional feedback from the user. Since for the search conference, we don't want this, there's nothing the user will say, maybe thank you, but you can say it even without the microphone on. And to use a card in combination with this that will be sent to the companion app or to the device that has a display, we can create a card attachment, basically. It has a title, so the title would be upcoming conferences, and it has a text. So the text for the card would only be the uploaded list of conferences. Then we create an outgoing message, which still has the full response that we want to hear, and we attach this card onto it. And then, instead of replying the string, we reply the outgoing message object. So this is how you would send card attachments to your Alexa skill. And this is how it looks like on the Echo Show display. If you don't have an Alexa, but still want to develop skills for it, you can do that. There's a website called echosim.io. If you go there, you can just log in with your Amazon account. And once you do that, you end up with basically just like a big microphone button. You can press that and speak into your laptop microphone, and then it will just trigger the same thing as is it Alexa. Because I'm a danger seeker, I'm not going to do that, but using Alexa with an iPhone hotspot sitting there, so we can see how it goes. Alexa, ask conference guide for upcoming conferences.
The upcoming conferences are Laracon US, Laracon EU, Full Stack Europe.
I love how she pronounces the Laracon. Okay. Now, to access slots that we receive in these intents, we can use some extra information from the message. So we listen for this search conference with language intent, because this is a different intent now. And to access the slots, we access the message, which is just the incoming payload that we receive from Amazon. So you can just receive everything you get from Amazon. And then this message has extra information, which are slots. So you can just pull them out, and it's just an array of slot name, they have a value, and then you can just pull this out. And then use it in your reply. So let's try this as well. Alexa, ask conference guide about upcoming Ruby conferences.
These are the upcoming Ruby conferences.
Okay. I'm not listing them there because I don't know shit about Ruby conferences, but yeah. Okay. Now we had, so with listening for cities, it's really just the same. So I wanted to show you some state management, which is the fourth feature, which is we want to open the skill. It should ask me for my name. I reply it. It gets somehow stored, and we reuse it later on. Now, when you open a skill by just saying, Alexa, open invocation name, then Amazon will send you a specific event. So this is a launch request event. And with Botman, you can listen for these types of events using Botman on and then Amazon Alexa drive a launch request. So every time someone just opens our skill, we will reply, hello, what is your name? Then I have defined a new name intent, which just consists of one slot for a first name. And every time we hear this name intent, I will store the value of this slot information in what is called in Botman a user storage. So this storage is bound to the user that is interacting with your chatbot or with your voice application. Now, in terms of Alexa, it's not really the user, because if you have two people in your family that use the same Alexa device, it will not differentiate them. This is possible that Alexa can send you like a user ID, but I think you have to opt in for that. So for Alexa, it's bound to the actual device. And then we store the name in this user storage and just reply, nice to meet you, whatever he said. And when then someone says, Alexa, stop, we can listen for a stop intent. So this is a predefined intent from Amazon. You don't need to define that manually. And then we just pull the name out of this user storage for the user that is interacting with Alexa and use it in a reply. So let's try this. Alexa, open conference guide.
Hello, what is your name?
Marcel.
Nice to meet you, Marcel.
Stop.
Goodbye, Marcel.
Okay. The last times I got called Gary. I don't know why. But I was silently hoping for it for this demo because it would be more fun, but I can still make the joke. Okay, so once you have defined all these intents, you're basically ready to ship your skill. And for this, you need to define the name of your skill. You need to provide like a description, some sample sentences. So when users first try your skill and download it from the skill store, they immediately need to know how they can actually interact with your skill. And then it goes into a review process by Amazon, which might take a couple days. But it's also possible for Amazon, which is quite interesting for companies, to have internal skills so that you don't need to publish them in the store, but you can still access them and, I don't know, create funny office skills. So yeah, that's about the whole way on how you can invoke these skills, how you can build them on Alexa's side, and how you can develop them. If you want to know more about how Botman works, want to know more about how you can use specific parts of these Alexa intents, these special intents that exist there, the events, go to the official documentation on botman.io. It's all open source and available on GitHub with the MIT license. And that's about it for me. Thank you.